I never thought I'd meet my wife at a sports club. I wasn't exactly the athletic type, but one of my coworkers had been pestering me to get out more and join him for some pickup basketball games at the community center. At the time, I was in my late 20s, not particularly out of shape, but far from the guy I used to be fresh out of college. I figured some cardio wouldn't hurt, so I finally gave in. It was a Tuesday night, and the place was buzzing. The courts were filled with groups playing basketball, volleyball, and racquetball. I stuck to the basketball court, playing a couple of games, and afterward wandered over to the juice bar to cool down. That's where I first saw Kelly. She was standing with a friend, both in their workout gear, laughing over smoothies. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she had this easy, relaxed smile that lit up the room. I don't know what compelled me, but I ended up sitting just a couple of seats away. Maybe I was hoping she'd notice me, though in hindsight, I probably looked like a sweaty mess. I was just about to leave when she turned to me. "You play ball?" she asked, pointing toward the courts. "Yeah, sort of," I said, chuckling. "I'm more of a stand around and hope someone passes kind of guy." She laughed. "Well, at least you're out there." Her friend nudged her and whispered something that made Kelly roll her eyes. I decided to take the opportunity. "Jonathan," I said, extending my hand. "Kelly," she replied, shaking it firmly. Her grip was confident, and it caught me off guard. From there, the conversation flowed naturally. She was part of a recreational volleyball league that met every Thursday, and somehow by the end of the night, I found myself agreeing to show up and watch her play. I did, of course. The next Thursday, I sat in the stands, pretending to casually watch the game, but my eyes were glued to her. Kelly had this competitive edge that was impressive to see, but what stood out the most was how she encouraged her teammates, even when they were losing. After the game, we grabbed a bite to eat. I remember sitting across from her at that diner, realizing I didn't want the night to end. One dinner turned into two, and soon enough, we were inseparable. Fast forward 6 years, and we were married with 2 kids, Emily, our oldest, and our little firecracker of a son, Ethan. Life felt good. Sure, there were days when parenting wore us thin, but Kelly and I had always found a way to keep things steady. Or so I thought. Lately, though, something had felt off. It wasn't anything obvious, but the small things added up. Kelly seemed distracted. She was on her phone more, and sometimes I'd catch her staring off into space during dinner. I chalked it up to stress. She'd been working more hours at the hospital, picking up shifts on weekends. Maybe it was just my imagination. That's why, a couple of weeks ago, I decided to plan a surprise. I wanted to remind her of how things used to be, before the schedules and exhaustion took over. I thought a night out, just the two of us, would help us reconnect. My parents live about an hour and a half away, so I called and asked if they'd watch the kids for the weekend. They agreed immediately, happy to spend time with their grandkids. Kelly didn't suspect anything. I told her I was taking the kids to visit their grandparents and would be gone most of the day. But instead of staying at my parents' until late, I planned to drop them off early and head straight back. I had dinner reservations at this new restaurant downtown, and I even thought we could grab drinks at a couple of our old spots beforehand. Everything was set. I left at 8:30 that morning, excited. The drive to my parents' house that morning felt longer than usual. Emily was singing in the back seat, making up silly songs, while Ethan chimed in with his own toddler babble. It was the kind of drive that usually made me smile, but my mind was elsewhere. It had been months, maybe longer, since Kelly and I had gone out alone together. Every day seemed like a rotation of work, errands, and parenting duties. By the time the kids were in bed, we were too exhausted to do much more than sit on opposite ends of the couch, scrolling through our phones until one of us finally called it a night. That's why I planned this. I thought maybe if I could surprise Kelly with a night out, it would help. Remind her of how things used to be. When I pulled into my parents' driveway, the kids scrambled out of the car and ran straight to the door. My dad was already outside, waiting with a grin as Ethan barreled toward him. "You sure you don't want to stay for a while?" my dad asked as he helped carry the bags inside. I shook my head. "Not this time. I've got plans for Kelly tonight. Thought I'd surprise her." "Good man," he said with a nod. "She'll appreciate it." I hoped he was right. Little did I know, that night would change everything. I left my parents' house a little after 8:30 in the morning. By the time I was pulling back into our neighborhood, The clock on my dashboard read just shy of 12:30. The kids were happily dropped off, and I was feeling good about the surprise I had planned for Kelly. As I turned onto our street, I noticed a truck parked right in front of our house. I slowed down, squinting to see if I could recognize it, but nothing about it seemed familiar. It wasn't strange to see cars parked there. Neighbors had guests over all the time. Still, something about it felt out of place. I brushed it off. Maybe it was someone visiting next door. I drove past the house and parked a few doors down, far enough that I figured Kelly wouldn't hear me pulling in. The thought crossed my mind to sneak in through the basement door instead of using the garage. I thought it might be fun to surprise her, catch her off guard. She'd probably laugh, and maybe it'd set the mood for the night I had planned. I made my way to the side of the house, letting myself in through the basement entrance. I eased the door shut behind me, careful not to make any noise. The house was quiet, too quiet. I stepped lightly, making my way through the basement and heading toward the stairs that led up to the main floor. That's when I heard it. At first, it sounded like faint murmurs, muffled noises coming from the floor above. I stopped in my tracks, tilting my head to listen. Kelly's voice drifted down, soft and breathy. I froze, feeling embarrassed. It crossed my mind that she might be having some personal time to herself. I felt guilty for sneaking in like this. I turned back toward the basement door, ready to slip back outside and pull into the driveway like nothing happened. I figured I'd make some noise in the garage, give her enough time to hear me and get herself together. Then I heard him. A man's voice. Deep, low, and unmistakable. I felt my stomach drop. For a second, I thought I misheard. Maybe the TV was on? But the sounds that followed left no room for doubt. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I can't even describe what I felt in that moment. Nausea twisted in my gut, and I stood there frozen, gripping the stair rail like it was the only thing keeping me upright. My mind raced, trying to piece together a rational explanation. But there wasn't one. I don't know what made me decide to keep going, but I did. Slowly, carefully, I made my way up the stairs. I didn't want to burst in. I didn't even want to confront them. I just needed to see it for myself. The door at the top of the stairs was slightly ajar. I pushed it open just enough to step into the kitchen. The house was still except for the faint sounds coming from the living room. I didn't need to see to know what was happening. The noises painted a vivid enough picture on their own. I could feel my hands trembling, but I kept moving. I crept to the edge of the wall that separated the kitchen from the living room. I didn't dare peek around the corner. I knew they'd see me if I did. Instead, I pulled out my phone. I opened the camera app, gripping it so tightly I thought it might shatter in my hand. Slowly, I extended my arm, angling the phone just enough to capture whatever was happening in the next room. I didn't want to watch, but I couldn't look away. The screen showed everything I needed to see. Kelly, my wife, was on the couch, wrapped around a man I didn't recognize. I won't spell out the details, but you can imagine the rest. I hit record without thinking. I didn't even know why I was doing it. Maybe I thought I'd need proof later, or maybe I just couldn't process what was happening in real time. All I knew was that I stood there, in my own kitchen, silently recording while my wife was with someone else just a few feet away. The seconds stretched endlessly. I felt like I could pass out at any moment. Eventually, Kelly's voice broke through. She jumped off him, laughing as she made some offhand comment about heading to the bedroom. She mentioned how much time they still had left. That was the part that cut the deepest. I stayed frozen as I watched them disappear upstairs. After the creak of the bedroom door closed behind them, I finally moved. I stepped into the living room, scanning the space as if I was walking into someone else's home. The coffee table was cluttered with half-empty glasses and an open bottle of wine. Then I saw the man's pants tossed over the back of the couch. I don't know why I did it, but I walked over and grabbed them. His wallet was still in the pocket. I slipped it out, flipping it open to his driver's license. Mark. I took a picture of it, capturing his name, address, everything. I held onto the wallet for a moment longer before dropping it back onto the couch. I left the house the same way I came in, through the basement door. Back in my car, I sat behind the wheel, shaking. I cried harder than I had in years. I watched the video, replaying it over and over until I felt numb. I sat in the car for what felt like an eternity, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. The video still played in my head. Every frame burned into my memory. I must have watched it 5 times before I finally forced myself to stop. My phone sat on the passenger seat, screen dimmed but still open to the photo of Mark's license. I stared at his address, wondering what kind of man he was. The thought of driving back to my parents' house crossed my mind more than once, but I couldn't face them. Not like this. What would I even say? That I made dinner reservations for Kelly, only to catch her with someone else? The kids would ask why I came back so soon. I wasn't ready to explain anything. So I stayed there, parked just a few houses down, until the ache in my chest dulled enough for me to move. By the time I pulled into the driveway and opened the garage, I had convinced myself I could handle it. I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. The door to the house creaked softly as I stepped inside, intentionally louder than it needed to be. I tossed my keys onto the counter with a heavy clink and made enough noise that she would hear me coming. I wanted her to know I was home, give her time to fix whatever mess she had upstairs. When she appeared at the top of the stairs, her robe was tied tightly around her waist, damp hair tucked behind her ears. Her face was flushed, and for a brief second, panic flashed in her eyes before she forced a smile. "You're home early," she said, descending the steps slowly. I tried to smile back, ignoring the weight pressing against my chest. "Yeah, I thought I'd surprise you." She laughed nervously. "I was just about to take a bath. Long day." I could still hear the faint echo of her voice from earlier, though she tried to mask it with nonchalance. I hated how well she played it off, like nothing had happened, like she hadn't been with someone else less than 20 minutes ago. But I kept playing along. "I had something planned for tonight," I said, keeping my tone light. "Made reservations for us." Her eyes brightened, but there was something else there. Relief. Maybe. "Oh, that's sweet. I'd love that." She stepped into the kitchen, grabbing a bottle of wine from the counter. "How about we start early? Pre-game a little before we get ready?" I nodded, even though the last thing I wanted was to sit across from her and pretend. She poured 2 glasses, handing one to me as we moved into the living room. The couch still looked exactly how I had seen it through my phone screen. Blankets carelessly thrown to the side, a glass ring left behind on the coffee table. I couldn't stop myself from picturing it. Kelly sat next to me, tucking her legs beneath her as she sipped her wine. Her hand brushed against my leg. She leaned in closer, pressing soft kisses along my jawline. I let it happen. I could barely focus, though. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement by the basement door. A shadow. I didn't need to look directly to know it was him. Mark. I could hear his careful footsteps as he crept quietly downstairs, slipping out the same way I had come in. I didn't say a word. Instead, I let Kelly pull me deeper into the couch, pretending I didn't notice the man who had just left our house. The next morning, I woke up before her. The sun hadn't even fully risen, but I sat at the kitchen table staring at my phone, the video queued up again. I told myself I wouldn't watch it, but I did. Over and over. Every time I hit play, I hoped something would change, that maybe this time I'd feel something other than the hollow ache that lingered in my chest. But nothing changed. Kelly must have noticed the shift in me because, over the next few days, she asked if I was okay more times than I could count. "Is something bothering you?" she asked one night while we were folding laundry together. I shook my head. "Just work stuff. It's nothing." She stared at me for a long time, like she knew I was lying but didn't want to push further. I started avoiding her at night, retreating to the basement or pretending to fall asleep early. The idea of being alone with her felt suffocating. Still, I couldn't stop watching the video. It was like some twisted compulsion. After about a week, I finally started doing what I should have done from the beginning. I went through her phone. I waited until she was asleep, carefully unlocking it and scrolling through her messages. I searched for his name, checked recent calls, dug through old photos. Nothing. No messages. No calls. It was like he didn't exist. I almost convinced myself that maybe it had been a one-time thing. Maybe they had only met that day, and there was no lingering connection. But that thought didn't last long. I remembered the driver's license photo still saved in my phone. One afternoon, while Kelly was at work, I searched for him online. Mark. Landscaper. I found his business website, a small operation, nothing fancy. A few months ago, Kelly had mentioned wanting to have the yard cleaned up. She said she'd found someone local to handle the mulching. It clicked then. I drove past his house the next day. It wasn't far, only about 15 minutes from ours. A single-story place with a gravel driveway. His truck was parked out front. I circled the block 3 times, each time telling myself I wasn't going to stop. I never knocked on the door. I just wanted to see him. But the worst part, the part that made me feel the most pathetic, was that I didn't do anything. I kept driving, and when I got home, I watched the video again. I don't know why I keep holding on to it. Didn't mean to avoid Kelly, it just happened naturally. Every evening after the kids were asleep, I found excuses to stay in the basement or lose myself in meaningless tasks. Sometimes I told her I was tired, retreating to bed early and pretending I had long work days. Other times, I stayed up late watching TV, leaving the couch only when I was sure she had already gone to bed. She noticed, of course. She asked me if something was wrong more than once, but I dodged the questions with half-hearted excuses. The truth was, I couldn't stand the thought of being alone with her. There was a wall between us now, thick and impenetrable. Every time I looked at her, all I could see was that video flashing behind my eyes. Every touch, every kiss, felt like some grotesque imitation of what we used to have. But one night, I slipped. It was after a long day at work. I'd had a few drinks, not enough to be out of control, but just enough to let my guard down. Kelly leaned into me on the couch, and I didn't pull away. One thing led to another, and I let it happen. The next morning, I stared at the ceiling, disgusted with myself. I told myself I wouldn't let it happen again. That night felt heavier than usual. Even as Kelly got ready upstairs, humming softly as she brushed her hair, I couldn't shake the knot twisting in my stomach. I sat on the edge of our bed, staring down at my shoes, mentally running through all the ways this could go wrong. I had planned it out in my head, how I'd slip away unnoticed and follow her. I told myself I wasn't crossing a line, that I had every right to know the truth. But no matter how I tried to justify it, I felt like I was betraying something. Still, that didn't stop me from pretending I had work. By the time the babysitter arrived, I was already dressed and ready to leave. I kissed the kids goodnight, told Kelly I'd probably be home late, and walked out the door, heart hammering in my chest. I didn't drive straight to the restaurant. Instead, I stopped at a bar downtown and ordered a drink, something to take the edge off. One drink turned into 2, and by the time I pulled into the restaurant parking lot, the alcohol had done little to calm my nerves. Her car was there. I sat in my own car for a minute, gripping the steering wheel and staring at her vehicle like it might disappear if I blinked too long. I wasn't sure what I expected. Part of me hoped I'd see Mark walk through the entrance, arms slung casually around Kelly's waist. The other part wanted desperately to be wrong. Eventually, I got out and went inside. The restaurant was dimly lit but lively, couples chatting over wine, waiters weaving through tables. I scanned the room quickly, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. And then I saw her. She was sitting at a table by the window, across from another woman I didn't recognize. Not Mark. Kelly looked up almost immediately, eyes locking with mine the second I stepped through the door. I cursed under my breath, but it was too late to turn around. "Jonathan," she said, brow furrowing in confusion as I approached the table. "What are you doing here? I thought you had work." I forced a smile, trying to play it off. "Work ended early. I thought I'd stop by and say hi since we had a sitter tonight." Her friend smiled politely, but shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I could tell Kelly was surprised, maybe even a little suspicious, but she didn't say anything more. We had a couple of drinks, made small talk, and after about half an hour, I left to head home. Nothing about the night felt right. Even though I didn't catch her with him, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still lurking just beneath the surface. By the time Kelly got home that night, the kids were asleep, and I was sitting at the kitchen table, the video queued up on my phone again. I told myself I wouldn't watch it, but I did. I don't know why I needed to remind myself of what I had seen. Maybe to reignite the anger, to make sure I didn't back down when the moment came. When the front door opened, Kelly stepped inside quietly, setting her purse on the entryway table. Her eyes landed on me, and I saw the confusion flicker across her face. "You're still up?" she asked, carefully toeing off her shoes. "I thought you'd be asleep by now." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of every step as I approached her. She could tell something was wrong. Her body stiffened, shoulders inching upward like she was bracing for whatever was coming. "I know," I said flatly. Her eyes narrowed. "Know what?" I swallowed the lump in my throat and pulled my phone from my pocket, turning the screen toward her. The video played, flickering against the dim light of the kitchen. Kelly's face paled almost instantly. For a moment, she didn't speak. She just stood there, frozen in place, eyes glued to the screen. I stopped the video halfway through. I couldn't bear to watch the rest, not again. "I saw you," I said quietly, but there was venom laced in every word. I was standing right there in the kitchen. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. "You lied to me," I continued, voice rising. "In our house. In our home. While I was planning a night out for us, you were screwing some guy in the living room." Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't care. She tried to speak again, but I cut her off. "Don't," I snapped. "Don't stand there and pretend like this is some misunderstanding. I saw everything, Kelly. I have his name, his address. I know who he is." Her hand trembled as she covered her mouth, and for a second, I thought she might collapse right there in the doorway. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice cracking. I don't know what to say." "Say why," I shot back. "Why him? Why now? Was it worth it?" She shook her head, tears falling freely now. "It wasn't supposed to happen. It just—" I scoffed. "It just what? Happened twice? 3 times?" Kelly crumbled into the nearest chair, burying her face in her hands. I couldn't tell if she was crying out of guilt or fear of what came next. "I ended it," she muttered through her hands. "That day, after you came home. I swear I haven't seen him since." I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't. "You destroyed everything," I said finally, stepping back. "And I don't know if I can forgive you." I didn't wait for a response. I left her sitting there at the table, drowning in silence as I walked upstairs and closed the bedroom door behind me. I didn't sleep much that night. Even after Kelly had gone upstairs, her face streaked with tears, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The house was quiet, too quiet, and the weight of everything settled heavily on my shoulders. I could still hear her sobbing faintly through the walls, but I stayed put, staring at the empty wine glass she had left behind. I wanted to feel something, anger, disgust, maybe even a sense of closure now that everything was out in the open. But all I felt was exhaustion. The video was still on my phone, tucked away in a hidden folder. I pulled it up one last time, my thumb hovering over the play button. I didn't watch it. I just sat there, phone glowing softly in the dark, until eventually, I turned it off and went to bed. Kelly was already awake when I came downstairs. Her eyes were red and swollen, and she barely looked at me as she handed Ethan his breakfast. Emily sat at the table quietly, drawing in a coloring book, oblivious to the storm brewing between us. We didn't say much that morning. After the kids were dropped off at school, we finally sat down to talk. Kelly told me everything. She met Mark twice, once for the landscaping job and again after that, which was the day I caught them. She swore up and down that nothing else had happened between them, that she realized how wrong it was and ended things immediately. "I love you," she said, voice trembling. "I never wanted to hurt you, Jonathan." I asked her for proof, but she said she had deleted everything. Texts, calls, even his number. She blocked him on every platform she could think of. "He knew I was married," she admitted, but it didn't seem to bother him. Her words lingered. I wasn't sure which part stung more, the betrayal itself, or the fact that Mark didn't care. Kelly asked me to delete the video. I said no. She didn't understand why, and honestly, I didn't either. I just knew that I couldn't bring myself to erase it. Her frustration slipped through then. "Are you keeping it to punish me? Or do you just want to watch it?" That hit a nerve. I didn't answer, and we both let it drop, knowing neither of us was ready for whatever argument would follow. By the time night rolled around, we were exhausted. She apologized again, over and over, until eventually we went to bed in separate rooms. Surprisingly, things got better in the days that followed. Maybe it was the relief of having everything out in the open or the weight of no longer pretending, but I felt calmer. Kelly tried harder. Small things, like texting me throughout the day or making sure we spent more time together as a family. We even went on another date, though it felt more like an attempt to reclaim normalcy than anything else. She kept apologizing, even when I didn't ask for it. I told her she couldn't see or talk to Mark again. That was my one hard rule, and she agreed without hesitation. I wanted to believe her, but trust doesn't come back overnight. The first real test came a week later. I had a work trip coming up, 3 days out of town. Normally, I wouldn't think twice about leaving, but now the thought of being away from home made me anxious. I don't feel comfortable leaving, I admitted to Kelly as we sat on the couch one night, the TV humming quietly in the background. She placed her hand on my knee, giving it a gentle squeeze. I understand, but Jonathan, I'm not going to hurt you again. I swear. I wanted to believe her, but doubt crept in anyway. If it'll make you feel better, she added, put up cameras in the house. I don't care. Whatever you need to trust me again. The fact that she offered didn't ease my mind the way I thought it would. But I did it. The next day, I installed small cameras in the living room and hallway. I told myself it was temporary, just something to get me through the work trip. Kelly didn't complain. She even helped me set them up, logging into the app to test the angles. It felt strange, almost like I was invading my own home. But I needed something to hold on to. The trip came faster than I expected. On the day I left, Kelly kissed me goodbye at the door. The kids waved from the front porch, and for a brief moment, everything felt normal. But normal wasn't something I trusted anymore. I checked the cameras more times than I cared to admit. Every hour I found myself glancing at the app, watching the empty living room like I expected something to happen. It never did. By the time I got home, the house was just as I left it. Kelly greeted me with a long hug, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we could make it through this. Things aren't perfect. I still catch myself watching the video sometimes, even though I know I shouldn't. I don't know why I hold on to it. Maybe as a reminder, or maybe because part of me doesn't want to forget how close we came to falling apart. Kelly tries. I try. But trust is a fragile thing, and every day feels like balancing on a thin wire, hoping we don't slip again. The kids don't know, and I pray they never will. I'm not sure where we're headed, but for now, we're moving forward. And sometimes, that's the best you can do. If you were in my shoes, do you think you could move forward and rebuild trust? Or is something like this too much to forgive? Would you have confronted her the moment you found out? Or would you have waited and gathered more proof before saying anything? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for being here. Don't forget to subscribe to Deceived Buddy so you never miss an update on more real-life stories. And as always, see you in the next video.